Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I want to extend a very warm welcome to our session named Creating Opportunities and Managing Expectations, Synergies between Academic Hosts and Administration. Before starting, I would like to briefly introduce the panelists. I would start with the second in line, Professor Petra Nick, who is, oh no, now I'm struggling with the technique. So, sorry for struggling with the technique. Professor Nick was born and raised in the very south of Germany. And after his studies and doctorate at the University of Freiburg, he was awarded several fellowships. He held postdoc positions in Japan and Strasbourg, France. Petra Nick declined several calls of full professorship before accepting this very position at the University of Karlsruhe. Distinguished with several teaching awards, including the one of the state Baden-Württemberg, he is by trade an excellent teacher and mentor. Especially notable is his Forum for Critical Interdisciplinarity, FKI, he established together with his colleague from the Institute of Philosophy, Professor Matthias Gutmann. He's a good listener and always with his way of looking beyond one's own nose in science as well as in human relationship. Professor Nick has just recently welcomed a second Philip Schwartz Fellow in his group. Professor Annie Powell is the second person I would like to introduce you. She is natural from Lincoln in the East Midlands of England and had studied chemistry in Manchester. Her first major stay in Germany was in the late 80s with a postdoc position in Freiburg. After that, she held positions as a lecturer in different institutions in England. And in 1999, she was appointed full professor of inorganic chemistry at the former University of Karlsruhe. Today, she is leading scientist and head of two institutes, Inorganic Chemistry and Institute of Nanotechnology at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. A bright scientist with a long list of international distinctions, Professor Annie Powell is too an especially dedicated teacher and mentor. With a long list of many international researchers in her group, among them 10 Humboldt Fellows, she also hosts Friend of Lead researchers at her institute. She does so in a very engaged, practical, non-fuzzy way, and we are very pleased to have her here. Last not least, I'm happy my colleague Dr. Heinemann from University of Bayreuth arrived. He's the director of the International Office of University of Bayreuth, and his previous position include being a managing director of the Berlin Graduate School of Muslim Cultures and Societies at the Freie Universität Berlin. And before that, he was a research fellow and a project manager in higher education, Orient Institute Bayreuth, Lebanon, Istanbul, Turkey, from the Max Weber Foundation. Dr. Heinemann brings to this session an extensive experience in internationality and internationalization, an expert in administrative issues as well as in the strategic development of universities. My name is Petra Roth. I'm a forest engineer and biologist by trade, trained in Brazil and Australia and Germany. And I'm now the director of the International Scholars and Welcome Office with the International Affairs at the KIT. The slogan of our department is expertise in researchers' mobility. And to maintain this motto, we had really to learn a lot in the past few years with the Philip Schwartz initiative in particular. So when it came up, we embraced the opportunity to be able to address and support threatened researchers and hosting them at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, and regarding them as part of our client group was given. Nevertheless, we sense that we have facing a complete new situation. So I come to the motivation for this workshop or for this panel session. Hosting persecuted scholars or at-risk academics at the institution poses challenges as well for the administration, the host and mentors, and of course to the scholars themselves. Sorry. It's too better? Okay. So we sense the strong necessity of harmonizing the efforts of all three groups related to the issues of settling in, the integration of into a new scientific, administrative and social environment, the acceptance of a new reality, and working together on perspectives for the time after the funding, after the contracts from day one. So the adjustment to the unknown is a very difficult task for the persecuted researchers who didn't come as voluntarily as other researchers do. So we want to stress out the importance of cooperation between the administrative support and the hosts, maintaining a dialogue and a constant participation, and always involving the persecuted scholar himself or herself. Before entering the discussion, we look forward to some initial thoughts from Professor Nick, please.
Welcome everybody. I'm very glad to be here and to talk about the possibility to integrate scholars from all over the planet into our academic system. And it's not an easy task, and although it's great that there is an initiative like the Philipp Schwarz Fellowship or the Scholar at Risk Network, one general problem is that the running times are very short. So it's very difficult to get a perspective for a person coming from a different system who has lost all his network, who has lost everything which makes him into a scientific and sometimes even a human person, because he was stripped from all what he had, and to integrate him into our system, which is very competitive. And this is one of the first conflicts we have to handle. We are here a rich country, I would say that, but the situation in academia is very, very competitive, and it's not so easy to explain this to somebody coming from a country where things are not running well, but where usually people get at a very early stage permanent positions, and to tell him that, okay, me as mentor, my first permanent position was when I became a professor in Karlsruhe. I was 40 at that time, and this is of course shocking for somebody coming from other countries where this is not the case. So the time is very short, and one has to go on very efficiently to integrate the scholars into our system, and then tell them, well, it would be great if you would have a permanent position in academia, but the probability is more or less close to zero that you will be able to do this in that time. So basically most of it is at the moment gambling for time to find possibilities to prolong the time to arrive here, because one has to start from the scratch. Very often they didn't have anything which they could bring with them, so they cannot go on with their previous projects very often. So this is one of my major sorrows I have when I'm handling scholars at risk in my lab, and I don't know a good solution for it. Many of these people would be probably in the long term be suited to be in that what we call in German der Mittelbau. That means permanent positions somewhere in university, either in teaching or in research, but these positions in Germany have been systematically removed in the 70s and 80s, so we don't have these positions anymore. So this is one point, which is a political point actually, and I would like to take the occasion here to put this into the public awareness. The second point I want to make is, of course, it's very difficult first for a scholar to start from the scratch, and what I found most important is that you have to create a network which is not only going on projects and science. This is of course important, but also you have to look at the person as a whole and help him or her to just reroute himself, herself in the new way. So it's a very interesting also debate about how to integrate, what to accept from the new environment, culture, what to maintain from the own culture. This is very important to have a good balance in that. And there are, of course, many practical problems of everyday life which have to be handled by a mentor normally. And in that point, it's very important when you have a good support by your institution, which fortunately in the KIT is the case. So many things I have to worry about, for instance, helping the scholar to find accommodation, which is pretty difficult in most German cities. So I'm very happy that I can send them to a very dedicated colleague in our international department who is really dealing with that, or many issues like visa applications, visa status, which is very complex and complicated. I'm a biologist, I would not be able to give really serious advice here. And so here we need the support of our institutions. I also would think it would be great, probably it happens, if those administrative bodies that are in charge of this in the different universities, when they really cross-connect, so because the experience can be shared and it can make the whole system more efficient and also create more equal opportunities for the scholars coming independently on which university they land up, which is very often a question of chance or fate. And the final, maybe most philosophical point is we should take now as host institutions or as host countries also the chance to see that it's a big chance, because we have people coming from a different background, different perspective. They bring us something, they bring a new viewpoint, and science is a social system, it's a social searching system. We try to search that what we call the truth, and the more eyes and the more perspectives you have, the easier. So to integrate this is also fruitful for our own society. That's it.
Thank you very much, Professor Nick. We will come back to one of your major statements later on. I would now invite Professor Powell for her first remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, as you will have heard, I'm not a German, and I came to Germany nearly 20 years ago now, from a position in the United Kingdom. And one of the students that I brought with me actually was my very first scholar at risk person. I didn't know it at the time because I hadn't even heard of scholars at risk in those days. And this was a young man who, as a 10-year-old child, had to flee from Sri Lanka. And he was telling me when I met him about how scary it was to have bombs thrown at you and have shooting in the streets and so on and so forth. And actually his pathway was very strange. So he actually came to Germany first with his family, and from there they moved to France because they didn't like Germany. Okay, fair enough. And he was actually brought up in the French system, but his brother said, you really need to go to the United Kingdom and learn English because that's the language of science. And I'm a chemist, and he wanted to do chemistry. And actually he knew very little English, so we had to communicate as best we could, and he gradually learnt more and more English. And then it was a bit of a shock to him when I announced that I'd decided to take the position in Germany. And he said, I don't want to go to Germany, I don't like Germany. And I said, well, then I can't offer you any position because I have positions there and I can't do anything for you in Britain, you'll have to find something else. And we agreed that he would come and visit before making a decision. And in the end, he realized it was a good thing to do. So he came to Germany with me. And he's now a professor in chemistry in Ottawa. So he's my big success story, I suppose, for rescuing somebody from a system and actually integrating them into 3 different countries in Europe, which I think is great. I fully agree with everything that Peter has just said about what we want to do when we get people to come here. Now, I haven't actually hosted anybody on a Philipp Schwarz initiative. I've hosted Humboldt Fellows. They're something a little bit different. But because I have this position in Germany, I actually have a lot of positions available where I can help people. So I see a lot of people writing to me and saying, I would like to come to work with you. And it's a matter of chance which ones I can actually choose. It's a question of actually having the position free and also liking the look of their CV maybe. But over the years, I've had many, many, many people from all over the world, from every continent apart from Antarctica. I've had one person at least. Lots of people from, of course, from China, from India, from Pakistan. Those are the countries that you see a lot of people from. But also people from quite exotic places, people from Sudan, people from Cameroon, and so on and so forth, and people from South America as well. And a great many of these have actually been people who are very dedicated to want to learn chemistry, and they take the courage to actually move country and take their chance in Germany. So they have to be able to communicate, obviously, in one common language, chemistry, but as well as that common language, we have English, and of course we also have, in our group, Germans. So we're integrating everybody in this particular way. And one of the nicest things that we do together is we do things like we bring dishes from our various countries, and we have a cultural exchange of the things that are important to us. And one thing that really does bring people together is to have good food and a good time together. And some of them drink alcohol and some of them don't, and we don't make any differences about this, and we just have a good time together and do some things together that bring the group as one thing into something more like a family situation. And I think this is something that's very, very important for people who want to help scholars at risk, is they have to try to find the culture that will enable these people to flourish, and also to understand the cultural differences. So one little anecdote that I'd like to tell you is that the very first time I had an Indian student in my group, at the same time I had a Pakistani student who'd applied to come there. And I was a little bit worried that these two would not get on, because traditionally Indians and Pakistanis don't really like each other. So I had this young Pakistani man, and I wanted to introduce him to this young Indian lady. And I said, this is Abbas here, and would you please talk here to him in your language, so that we can, at least see how things go. And so she said hello to him, good morning, how are you? And he said, oh, you can speak my language. And she said, no, I'm speaking my language. And it turned out they hadn't realized that Hindi and Urdu actually are pretty much the same language, they're just written differently. And those two people got on extremely well, and they're still good friends. So I don't want to say anything more at this moment, because I don't want to cut into our time. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Powell. So I'm just picking up on some comments of yours and Professor Nick, that the communication is key, finding a common language. What we from the administration do is provide courses for free, language courses in German, but also, if necessary, in improving scientific English. But also at the Institute, the efforts of the hosts, the mentors, are getting people together, finding their way of communication, their mutual understanding of their values and cultures and what they are contributing to the group. This cannot happen in the administrative part. And when you mentioned the support from administration with visa and so on, this in Germany, unfortunately, it is a given because we have the welcome center, so we are trained to do so. But with regards to persecuted scholars, we have had to learn a lot more. So what is also a track which we are very closely cooperating together with the hosts is since time zero working on the perspective after the funding period, because time is short. Philipp Schwarz is even 2 years, but still it's a short time. So I would like to ask Dr. Heinemann's opinion and experience on things like we have been doing in Karlsruhe is offering workshops on the German system, some mentoring programs opening up for persecuted scientists with specialized people who are developing these workshops, and to individual coaching. What are your experience, Dr. Heinemann?
I'm a bit conscious of time. We have 10 minutes left for this session. I would skip all the administrative services that are key to be provided as a basis. But of course, language courses don't pay bills. So what we have focused on, and we have a very vibrant discussion in the German branch of Scholars at Risk and in the steering committee, what we have focused on very much is to set the researcher free as soon as possible again. And I would like to take up one of your points. What we have noticed is that, of course, the scholars at risk who come to us have not lost all of their academic networks. Maybe their national networks and the connection to it. But if they were already scholars who worked internationally, then of course the international connections are still there. And we try to reconnect them to them as soon as possible. That is one point that has proven to be very productive. The second thing is, when choosing the Philipp Schwarz scholars who we decide to host, then we look very specifically into whether they would fit into current and ongoing project applications or into projects which are about to be hopefully granted. And this is exactly what we have done with one of our PSI scholars. We integrated her into a DFG-funded, German Research Foundation-funded project, which then boosted the funding period from 2 years to 8 years, because this was a 6-year project. And when we had reached this point, we didn't stop, because you never know how to proceed when this funding ends. So we looked into certain fellowships, Mercator Fellowship for instance, and tried to connect this person and work with her towards the profile that would fit and made her eligible to fit this profile for an application. So this is one thing, very cut to the point, that we have been very successful with. And the second thing that we try to do among all the discussions on trauma and getting hospitable and getting acquainted to the new place and the sustainable integration into the academic community, we tried really to help the scholar to get rid of the label refugee or scholar at risk academically, not personally, as soon as possible, and of course connect her to the international community. That is to say, we try to make this person visible. So publications are key. We have talked in previous sessions about if there are key works that would have to be translated from Arabic or from Turkish into English to be visible. We did that as a support service. We tried to get them into as many workshops as possible, international workshops, international conferences. And of course, a very core point of the discussion the whole time is that also for a German or any other international scholar entering the German academic system, there's no guarantee for any job, for any permanent position. So this is something that has to be part of the discussion from the very beginning. I think that would be my very short contribution.
So, Thank you very much, Dr. Heinemann, for your thoughts. We absolutely share. I saw that you, in your brief explanation, covered all the keywords I was hoping it would come up. And I would like to come back to the synergy effects between a specialized and professional administrative unit like yours, and dare say ours too, and the host, because in this little time with all these aspects to be covered, just like integration, language, communication is making persons fit for the competition, understanding the new system, looking on how to get publications in the most important languages and journals. I would like to ask your opinion on the part of on the balance of contribution by administration, by the host, I think the key issue, and also self-responsibility and setting free the scholar from being a refugee scholar, but being a part of the new scientific community. I would like to ask Professor Nick about that.
Yeah, I think it also depends a bit on the subject. So when you have, I'm a biologist, and biology you normally need minimum 2 years until you have the data together, especially when it's some molecular work, to write a publication. In some other subjects it's maybe earlier. So it means at the end of the Philipp Schwarz, the scholar is in the state that he can submit papers that have been done here. So this makes things not easier. I personally think, yeah, we have to just to struggle for more time in a way. So I'm very welcoming now the possibility to prolong for a third year in Philipp Schwarz. This is very useful, very important, because in this third years these things can happen so that the person can get a profile. And yeah, one can only support and help and try to bring him or her together with other, let's say, researchers to get visibility. That's very important. However, it's also, even if you try to get rid of the reputation, I'm a refugee, sometimes you are thrown back to it. If you are from Syria and you try to attend a conference in New Zealand or in the States, it can happen that you cannot go there because as a Syrian you are not allowed to enter the US, just as an example. So it means this is making things not easier. Yeah, so we have to play for time, and we have to train the scholars also in new methodology, because very often the methodology was not available already before the war or before the crisis. So it's a lot of things they have to learn in a very short time. So I have high esteem for their efforts, and of course we also need patience on the other side. Things don't fall from sky. It's a long process. It's a dialogue. The most important is that we keep very close contact, that we speak also about the things behind science. That's very, very important. I strongly support the point about the food. Food is really some very good unifying principle. You can cross cultural borders and you can make cultural diversity palatable. You taste it. It's nice to have so many different types of food. So this is good. So other things like that are very important, although they are not directly in the science, but it's important. Every scientist is a person, and persons are human beings. They have their private relations, they have their children, they have their wives, they have their private problems, they have their health issues. So you have to keep this in mind, and you have to remain in the dialogue. I think that's the most important, because they have to build up trust. The trust is the raw material of everything.
Thank you very much. He stressed, Professor Nick stressed once again the importance of the communication and integration activities within the institute, within the group, not only the normal office we have, like social activities organized by our unit, but also going deep into the group and the understanding and bringing people together. And before summing up the main topics, I think key is the time factor and the large list of things to do and develop in administration and with the host. I would like to pass to you in the audience to share some of your experience or your comments. will you? Any questions, any comments? Yes, please.
I'm wondering, you as professors, what kind of expectations do you have towards the scholar?
I'll just begin with that. I start with no expectation of anybody, whether they're a homegrown person or come from abroad, but I do have the expectation that we'll be able to pass the knowledge they need so that they can get to where they need to go to. As long as they're willing to learn, then we'll teach them anything. That's my view.
I would emphasize the same thing. So I have a very international group, and I have, of course, people coming with a fellowship, and when they have a fellowship, I know they are probably good, otherwise they wouldn't get it. And now with a specific scholar at risk, I think it's also a humanitarian action. It's my duty as scientist to help other colleagues that are not in the same lucky situation as I am, because I would expect the same if I'm in this situation. So I think the most important is that they are here, and then the rest we will do here. They will develop. We will try to help them as much as we can and create an environment where they will develop. And I think the rest will be done on spot. So no expectation whatsoever.
Johannes?
Good morning. I'm Johannes from the University of Cologne. I'm not going to hijack your session for the following session, but I'd like to highlight that we have done, subject of the next session, a survey into the expectations of hosts and guests. And it turns out that hasn't been always an optimum synergy, as it should be, that many hosts act from a humanitarian impulse. And I'm not aware of the needs of the hosted scholar, whereas the scholar on his side very often is not aware of the lacks he has. And that is a very unfortunate situation that leads to a situation in which, for example, we have one scholar who discovered only after 10 months on his tenureship that he should do a habilitation if he wants to continue his academic career in Germany. No one told him. And that seems to be very striking. It shouldn't happen, but it happened, even among very serious people on both sides. So I just wanted to highlight that if you are talking about managing expectations and the synergies of administrations, I think it is our task as administrators to help hosts to discover what the needs of the hosted people are. And that is really much more of a task than it seems.
Maybe I could just, sorry, please do applaud him. And I also want to apologise that my phone was meowing just now. But just to conclude on that, I would like to add that, of course, it does depend a little bit. We have expectations as hosts, but the people that we're hosting have expectations of the host as well. And I know that some hosts are not really always aware of that. They think, I've got somebody here who's going to do some work for me, and I can't help it if they don't understand how we live here in Germany. That kind of host is not actually very helpful. So the expectation goes both ways in a way. Yeah.
So thank you very much. Looking at the clock, we have to come to an end, unfortunately. I would have liked to have more discussion with you from the audience, sharing with your experience. So what we take from this session is that the importance of the cooperation between administration, the hosts and the researchers as well, and adjusting the expectations one has in regard of each other. And that one of the key issues would be the communication. Any one of you for a final statement, the closing? Heinemann, wollen Sie noch was sagen?
Maybe one final word. It always helps if the Philipp Schwarz initiative is a top priority of the executive board of the whole institution, because our experiences are that when you have to bridge times, when you have to get emergency funds maybe between funding periods, or just put it up on the agenda very high, then that is very helpful. It's very helpful if it's really a top priority of the university's executive board. So also visible in the hierarchy. Thanks.
So, thank you very much for being here, and I pass on to the colleagues of University of Cologne.